Good evening, everyone. Dr. Mike Krupa on this end here. Today is January 4th, the year of our Lord 2026. Welcome to another episode of DR Global. We are the English language podcast of Poland's largest conservative weekly, Do Rzeczy, non-neocon, that is weekly. So hopefully we'll keep it that way. For all you English speakers who want to learn Polish, that's the best way to go, dorzeczy.pl, or through our link here at DR Global. Guys, we've had a fairly eventful last 2 months with interviews with the likes of Colonel Wilkerson, Doug McGregor, Colonel Jacques Baud, who, by the way, has just been sanctioned by the European Union. And today we have another fantastic speaker, my old friend from my other old channel, Larry C. Johnson, also known as Larry the Shirt Johnson, because Larry likes to tell the world that he's in sunny Florida, as we here Eastern Europeans are in wintry Poland, where we finally see snow. Larry, my friend, how are you doing this afternoon?
Hey, doctor. Good to see you. I have a flannel shirt like the one you're wearing, and we're now at that time of the year where, at Florida, it'll get down to around, let's say 10 degrees Celsius, and in Florida, that's considered an Arctic winter. So, have to
Yeah,
break out the flannel shirt.
I bet I'd love to experience that winter, although because of my sort of Canadian background also, winter
Yeah,
without snow to me is not winter. So you got to have the snow, got to have the pucks, got to have the hockey. But for
yeah,
our Polish listeners who might not be familiar with Larry, as we'll be translating our interviews, as you guys know, just a short introduction. Larry is an American former intelligence officer. He's currently a political commentator, geopolitical commentator. He served at the Central Intelligence Agency and later in the U.S. State Department's Office of Counterterrorism before moving into private consulting and media analysis. And you can check out Larry's work at sonar21.com. The link will be in the description box. But I'm guessing a lot of our viewers already know about Larry Johnson because after we did our first interview with Professor Sakwa back in November, in the comments section, there were questions in Polish. When will you invite Larry Johnson? When will you invite Larry Johnson? So here to make everyone happy, we have Larry Johnson. And Larry, we'll dive right into it. It's obviously been an eventful 24 hours, to say the least, with what
yeah.
happened in Venezuela. Larry, I know you have an intelligence background, also in analysis in South America, especially in the Honduras section of the CIA back in the 80s. There's no better person to give us some background on what happened. I would like to begin with your take on the justification that the US government made for capturing Maduro. Because if you read the indictment, as I didn't read it too specifically, but I perused over it, and I noticed that the main arguments against Maduro seem to be that apparently he possessed machine guns, which sounds pretty ridiculous. So I was wondering if you could begin with the alleged justification that the United States
Yeah.
gave for kidnapping, whatever we think of him, leader of a sovereign country yesterday.
Yeah, I got a note overnight from a friend. He was the former director of the Latin American division and the director of operations. So, and he was disagreeing with my latest article, um, and he comes at it from the standpoint that Nicolas Maduro is a really bad guy. My point is particularly when you read the indictment. And I'm not arguing that Nicolas Maduro is some saint or some leader of a great democracy or anything like that. My issue is more to the point of uh, what standards is the United States using to interfere in the affairs of other countries, and particularly when we lose our damn minds that there's even a hint of foreign involvement or meddling in our own elections. So it's one of those. It's one of the clearest examples of hypocrisy, just rank hypocrisy on the part of the United States. Um, the problem I had with the indictment is because I've been involved with indictments and building cases where we present evidence in the complaint. And so, for example, it said, oh, he was working with FARC and he was working with the National Liberation Army, ELN, and with the Sinaloa cartel, and so on and so on. All this guilt by association without saying, uh, on December 15th, Professor Dr. Mike Krupa met with members of, pick your radical organization at such and such location at such and such time. That is actually what's called specific evidence. Just saying, Dr. Krupa, he's associated with people from the Bandera movement. Okay, what was the association? Because were you walking along the street and did somebody from that group bump into you, therefore you're associated? Or were you actually collaborating? So that's the first problem I see with the indictment. But the broader issue is this nonsense that it's all about narcotics and combating narco terrorism, as they claim. Because if the Trump administration was really serious about going after the narcotics and trying to shut down the flow of cocaine, but more importantly, fentanyl, Venezuela wouldn't be your number one target. Mexico would, number one. Number two, the money flows that make this so attractive as a business come out of the United States and go through U.S. banks and U.S. corporations. So, although this was dressed up about dealing with the threat of narco terrorism, that's not at all what it's about. This is about getting control of the oil, ultimately hoping to get control of the gold in Venezuela as well, and to control that country economically for the United States. So this whole drug angle is just I call it almost a fabrication. Yeah, has cocaine and marijuana been transiting Venezuela for years? Yeah, that's right. But it ranks below Colombia, it ranks below Mexico, and yet we're going after Venezuela first and foremost. When it's really not. So you take Venezuela out, is that going to hinder the drug flow of the United States? Absolutely not at all.
It's interesting because today on NBC, George Stephanopoulos, in a rare moment of journalistic integrity on his part, he asked Secretary Rubio what was the legal basis for what they did in Venezuela. And Rubio just went into this, tirade of, we're going to help the Venezuelan people. We're going to bring prosperity to the Venezuelan people. And then after Rubio stopped talking, Stephanopoulos asked him again, I ask you again, what is the legal justification, the basis for you controlling Venezuela? And Rubio can obviously offer an answer. And it reminds me of, I've read so much about the Iraq War because it was part of my PhD thesis, that moment when Colin Powell told George W. Bush that you break it, you own it, referring to Iraq. And right now, everybody, on the right, at least certain portions of the right, the MAGA right, are very happy that the commie is gone and everything. Well, plan A is done, but what's going to happen with plan B? That's the question right now. So how do you see, is there even a plan B, do you think, or do they just want to leave the situation as is and pressure the vice president in power in Venezuela right now? Because even today, I think Trump wrote on Truth Social that if the Venezuelan vice president doesn't do what we tell her, she might end up in a worse position than Maduro.
Yeah, so I'm surprised that the Rubio didn't use the talking point. The talking point, if you listened, yesterday, was Maduro is an illegitimate president. He's not the legitimate, real president. So, and that's actually under international law. The United States could make the case that they could do this against an illegitimate president. But you got to love the irony and the black humor that surrounds this, because who's the first one out of the box to go to say, yeah, that's right? Oh, that'd be Vladimir Zelensky, the illegitimate president of Ukraine. So it's the old pot calling the kettle black on this one. The fact that Rubio failed to articulate that is just underscores that this thing has not been thought through thoroughly. The whole question of governing Venezuela, when Trump was asked that, he basically said punted and said it's going to be the job of Rubio and the
Hegseth.
and Hegseth. I'm sitting there trying to call him something else. Um, the and you're sitting there going, what do they know about making the garbage trucks run on time? What do they know about making sure that the electricity is on? Uh, I saw that Elon Musk has volunteered 2 months of free Starlink. Once he gets them hooked, he's like that drug dealer offering you, hey, man, I'll just give you a bag of this Oxycontin or this cocaine. Go ahead and use it. And then all of a sudden you're addicted. And then next time when you come back, it's not free. You got to pay for it. So, Elon Musk is playing sort of an internet distributor of a narcotic. Um, the, the confusion is really who is in charge right now in Venezuela. I expect we're going to see in the coming days more and more street protests. Maduro
Mhm.
still has a sizable number of supporters. And we haven't even gotten to those families that have lost, whose loved ones were killed now. They've been murdered by the U.S. military in those strikes that Sunday night, or I guess late Saturday, early Sunday morning. Or let's see, it was late Friday into Saturday. Yeah,
Friday,
because
yeah, yeah.
I got the news of about 2 a.m. Saturday morning, and found it difficult to go to sleep. I've lost some time over that. Um, so this entire question of who's going to actually govern the place and the ability of the United States to control what's on the ground is seriously in question, because Venezuela is a big country. I've commented before; it's 3 times the size of Vietnam, and when you go back and look at the difficulty the United States had in quote controlling events in just half of Vietnam, with we had over a 500,000 soldiers on the ground, you begin to get an understanding of how difficult the situation could become in Venezuela, and it's compounded by the fact that the borders with Colombia and Brazil are certainly not controlled. They're porous, to say the least, and that means all sorts of smuggling and movement of personnel back and forth can occur without the United States being able to control it. So this looks to be a disaster in the making.
Someone commented that I think it might have been on a discussion that you were having the other day, that Trump's press conference yesterday was a bit reminiscent of the mission accomplished
Oh yeah,
phase
yeah,
of
that was
George
that
W.
was
Bush's
me. I said
presidency.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I thought that was pretty well stated. But Larry, I want to ask you from the standpoint of the role of the CIA in sort of orchestrating all this, because
Hmm.
okay, we have I think his Vice President Rodriguez is formally in power right now in Venezuela, but you have to consider that this operation, you had to pay off a lot of people. There must have been a lot of traitors around Maduro, and those people technically were the ones who weren't killed, are still around the vice president. So the question becomes, is there a plan B to activate those people again, or could there be a plan B to activate those people again to take her out, or there's an evolutionary strategy here whereby Rodriguez seems to claim that, yeah, we're going to be against the imperialists, we're going to keep the flame of the Bolivarian revolution alive, but
Hmm.
quietly and slowly she's going to be transitioning to a more pro-American stance. What's your take on such a position?
Well, actually, I had anticipated that they would be, and I think many did, that this Maria Conchada or Machado,
Yeah.
Corina Machado, I guess is her name, the Nobel Peace Prize winner for winning the Peace Prize for not doing anything for peace, that she would be the one who would be thrust into the office, because clearly she has been very easily manipulated. Boy, Trump trashed her yesterday. She's a nice lady, but she basically couldn't organize a 3-car funeral, was what he said. Um, so if they go with this Delcy, the current vice president, Um, they can replace her, but again, this gets back to the lack of planning. What is the plan? Who's going to be in charge? Who's going to make the decisions? And how, the question of governing is critically important. Um, I don't know if we're getting accurate data over the years out of Venezuela because, right now it's portrayed that there's the poverty of the average Venezuelan is extreme, so that it's gotten worse under Maduro. Um, Yet on some other measures, it looks like actually uh, the people have done okay in spite of Western sanctions. Um, so the key question in governing is going to be what is going to happen in the daily lives of Venezuelans, and if things get better, if there's an improvement in quality of life, then she'll hang on. If she doesn't, and then the U.S. decides, okay, we're going to replace her with what? And we can't underestimate the impact of this anti-U.S. sentiment that springs up out of the colonial legacy that the U.S. has left throughout Central and South America. I just saw a meme this morning tracking every country in Latin America. Let me see, do I have it here handy? In which the United States has overthrown the government. So it's we're talking about something that's uh, you know been going on for years, and so um, and it's left a scar. So there's not this warm desire to they look at the United States as a benign influence. I think it's increasingly seen as a malevolent influence.
From your time at the CIA, I know from your history that you were mostly associated with the Honduras, but I'm pretty sure
Right.
you've seen here and there, so to say. Can you give a brief outline, because this isn't the first time the Central Intelligence Agency has done something in Venezuela? I was wondering if you could give our listeners a bit of a background on how that particular agency influence the political dynamics around Venezuela, let's say within the last 20, 30 years.
Oh yeah. Well, in fact, I got the list here. So let's look at this is the list of U.S. regime change efforts in Latin America by year. That I can start it in 1848 with Mexico, but
Hmm.
then 1898 with Cuba. But let's just go back the last 20 years. So 2002 Venezuela, 2004 Haiti, 2009 Honduras, 2019 Bolivia, and then currently both Venezuela and Nicaragua, where we're working to overthrow those governments. You go back into the 80s, you add into that Honduras, Salvador, Nicaragua, Guatemala, Jamaica, Bolivia, Grenada. So it's a long legacy. Um, I wound up my last year at the CIA. I was the senior regional analyst for Central America, so I went beyond covering just Honduras. And um, one of my branch mates, a young woman, she was the Panamanian analyst. Now,
Hmm.
back then, there was a separation between the Directorate of Operations and the Director of Intelligence, and normally that was done because if whenever you put the intelligence analysis side of the house under the control of the Directorate of Operations, then the analysis is always going to get skewed because you're expected to support the covert
Yeah.
action, not report necessarily honestly on what's going on. But in this case, she was brought in to be made aware of the different things the U.S. Government was doing covertly to try to provoke a reaction from Manuel Noriega in order so that we could justify a military invasion. And this thing went on for about a year. It had finally culminated that by December, I left the agency in end of October of '89, moved to state. But a month and a half later, voila, we were invading Panama. Noriega he'd finally captured somebody or killed his troops had killed a couple of American servicemen, because back then we still had U.S. military personnel stationed at Quarry Heights, right outside of Panama City, and up north outside in the city of Cologne. So there was a large U.S. troop presence. In fact, I know back then um, that the military police, one of their jobs was to go into the strip clubs in Panama City to sort of keep order, keep an eye on American soldiers who were frequenting those venues. So, um, with that kind of setup, the agency actually had a lot of material to work with and try to provoke a reaction. So it wouldn't surprise me that there was all similar CIA efforts underway in Venezuela, but in this case more to buy people off. Apparently they did. They bought off the army, those who controlled air defense systems, so that those were not active the night that the U.S. went in. And there's actually some stories that Maduro was actually arrested, taken into custody by his own people, and then turned over
Mm-hmm.
to the U.S. personnel, and that they created this narrative of how Delta Force repelled down, attacked the Maduro household. Yeah, one thing that's bothered me about that narrative is, where were the bodyguards?
Mm-hmm.
We haven't heard any evidence that they were shooting. And supposedly the Wagner group was providing personal uh, security to Maduro, and
Oh
yet they
wow.
were completely taken by surprise. It looks like they were told to stand down. And then they get to the question of who told them to stand down.
Maybe Prigozhin from the grave.
Yeah,
But yeah, well, definitely the narrative that we're getting right now, it does seem pre-scripted because it's all about Team America kicking ass again, flying down
right.
south to bring about order. It reminds me of Kissinger saying about the Chile situation in the '70s. Whatever one thinks of Salvador Allende, I mean, why should we allow? I think the term was for the consequences of the irresponsibility of the Chilean voters to consume us, right? So I mean, Chilean people are dumb, little brown people are dumb, and we should go in there and restore order, which seems to be the modus operandi in the last, 30 or 40 years. But it does raise a lot of questions, on the broader geopolitical scale, because I seen a report today that apparently Bloomberg was reporting how on Chinese forums and their version of Reddit, I guess, Chinese people were just saying, hey, the Americans have set a good precedent for us to go into Taiwan now.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
why not? And I've seen reactions also coming from, Ukraine. Medvedev actually, I think he was talking to TASS today, the former president of Russia, said that, I mean, there's more justification for Delta Force or any other force to go in and take out Zelensky than they had to take out Maduro. So, how do you think the Chinese and the Russians are going to react to this? Or is this just another example for them of the Americans doing things in their neighborhood and not necessarily impacting them on a strategic level?
no, no. I think this has significantly harmed the U.S. relations with both China and Russia. From the standpoint of the Chinese, they've had pretty good economic relations with Venezuela, and it was, I think, their deputy foreign minister was meeting with Maduro just 12 hours before Maduro was being kidnapped. And so, for this to be done while a Chinese delegation is in Caracas, it infuriated the Chinese. They see this as just, another example of the United States uh, telling China that they're insignificant, and the United States is going to do whatever it wants, regardless. So then, from the Russian standpoint, uh, it was equally uh, harmful. Perhaps more so than what the Chinese being miffed at what they saw as a diplomatic insult. Uh, Here, the week that Donald Trump on Sunday is meeting, last Sunday is meeting with um, Zelensky, and while he's meeting with Zelensky, this attack of 91 drones starts on the official residence of Putin. Now, I don't know if Putin was there or not, but the fact that that started and then um, it culminates later in the week with you get Bibi Netanyahu in for a meeting, and then you get the spark of riots springing up in Iran that just coincide with Netanyahu's visit, then followed by this kind of illegal attack under international law. I mean, it's a complete violation. The Russians are having to reevaluate what the relationship is with the United States diplomatically. I was struck by the fury that was reflected in the comments of both Sergei Lavrov and Peskov, the spokesman for Putin in the Kremlin. Because this 91 drone attack, it didn't kill anybody, and it didn't even damage the residence of Putin. And compare that with how Russia reacted in the aftermath of the Crocus City Center terrorist attack in March of 24, which left 143 people dead, at least 143. So I was, when I see the Russians react like this, it tells me there's something more going on. There was something more to this than has been revealed publicly, whether it was, seen as a deliberate effort by Trump to, on the one hand, pretend to be promoting peace. Some have suggested that he was telling Putin, "Hey, give me a call at this time, and then wait there by the phone. We'll call you back once the meeting's over," so that they could locate where Putin was in order to hit him. But what I do know for a fact is that the Russian anger over this is unlike anything we've seen, and we've had a litany of terrorist attacks against a variety of Russian targets. 3 lieutenant generals assassinated in the last 18 months. And it all got started with the murder of the daughter of Alexander Dugin, Daria Dugina. She was riding in the car, and it was supposed to be her dad that was killed, and she ended up losing her life. But so Russia's looking back at all this variety of terrorist attacks, but this one, they put this one in a different category. So I'm not sure we know what's fully behind it, but the flouting of international law again by Trump adds to Russian doubts about, can they even have a relationship, a solid, valid relationship with Trump.
Larry, what do you make of the claims? I think it was I think he's a Russian analyst. He wrote an article in Al Jazeera just a few days before the whole Maduro operation, where he stated that what we might be seeing here is, Putin kind of saying, first of all, we're not going to die for Venezuela. Second of all, Venezuela is your backyard. We agree that we don't agree with your methods, but we agree it's your sphere of influence, so you have more leverage and more right to do things there that we don't, for example. But on the other hand, you're gonna bug off from Ukraine in that regard. And there's this unspoken sort of agreement between Russia and the United States that now there are spheres of influence, and Venezuela is a signal to Russia that you just go on doing what you're doing from the United States, but also unstated. That's at least what Ragozin stated in his article on Al Jazeera. I was wondering, what would you make of such an assertion?
Well, I think it's an interesting. I can't say, oh, that's absolutely wrong, but I think what's really going on here is something more sinister. That this attack on Venezuela to take out Maduro, to seize control of the oil, is the first step towards a renewed attack on Iran. And so from that standpoint, I could see Russia on the one hand making the case, all right, the United States, they're gonna meddle in their backyard, the modified Monroe Doctrine, I'll call it, And what I mean by modified is when the people like Trump talk about the Monroe document, they only talk about half of it in terms of no foreign influence in the Western Hemisphere, forgetting that the other part of Monroe Doctrine was, hey, U.S., you stay the hell out of other countries overseas as well. We haven't followed that. So, uh, on the one hand, you could say, okay, the Russians are willing to cut a deal, let the United States do what it does to Venezuela, in exchange that the U.S. is going to stop meddling and interfering in the internal affairs of Russia and supporting Ukraine. However, again, the very week that this military operation is supposed to take place in Venezuela, and I would presume if there had been that kind of deal cut with the Russians,
Mhm.
they would have known about it, that the United States then launches this attack to attempt to kill Putin. And people
Mhm.
say, well, how can you say they were trying to kill Putin? I didn't know uh, with any confidence that there was such a plan until the CIA came out to deny that there was a plan to target Putin. Because no, the plan, the Ukrainians were trying to hit a military target that was in the vicinity. But you got to step back and say, well, how the hell do you know that? Did the Ukrainians tell you? But what we know is the Ukrainians could not target even a site like that without U.S. intelligence, without coordinates provided by the United States government. So the United States knew what was taking place. And I think that explains the anger of Russia with respect to that particular incident. Now, jump ahead. The Russians aren't stupid, and part of Russia's future economic plan includes this north-south corridor that runs from Russia through Azerbaijan or through the Caspian Sea, through Iran down to the Persian Gulf or to the Indian Ocean. And any attempt to destroy Iran is of great concern to Russia. And we've seen a pretty significant uptick in Russian military cargo planes flying in and out of Tehran over the last couple of weeks, number one. Number two, there have been extensive contacts between the Iranian government and the Russian government since June 25th of this year, when the 12-day war ended. So uh, I think Russia, while Russia is not willing to quote go to war over Venezuela, by God, they are going to put a line in the sand when it comes to an attack on Iran, because Russia has a vested interest in ensuring that the government of Iran remains intact and that they have a friendly government on their southern border.
With regards to Iran, it's good that you mentioned it because former Secretary of State and former CIA director, by the way, Mike Pompeo, tweeted on January 2nd, in light of the protests that were happening in Iran. I'm going to read from his Twitter here. He wrote, "Happy New Year to every Iranian in the streets, also to every Mossad agent walking beside them." So I think
Yeah,
we've come to a
not too
very
subtle.
yeah,
Yeah, not,
absolutely. No more, this is for the Iranian people. The United States stands with the Iranian people and the usual rhetoric that we hear in that regard. And it's interesting how they're going all out in this regard and saying, yeah, it's not about democracy. It's about Israeli interests. It's about greater Israel. We're serving those interests. We good Christian Zionists. I remember the good old days when I was in high school in 2001, 2003, when the Iraq invasion was gearing up. And the lengths that they would go to, talk about bringing democracy and freedom, and Paul Wolfowitz saying how the oil is going to pay for the war. But here it's just blatant in your face. Yeah, we're going to screw you, and we're going to do it with Mossad, coming from a former United States Secretary of State. And had you stayed longer, Larry, in the CIA, he might have been your boss. So, what's your take on
oh,
why all of a sudden we're starting to say the truth as to our
well,
goals as per the United States?
yeah, and let's go back to what I call I don't believe in coincidence. So Trump meets with Bibi Netanyahu on Monday. What are they meeting about? Well, clearly it's about what's future actions with respect to both the Palestinians and the Iranians. Now, on the day that they're meeting, that's really the day that the start of the protests in Iran, and the Western media then starts picking up on it and portraying it as this very dire situation that the very Iranian regime is at risk of being collapsed. Um, there is a group called the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran.
Mhm.
So that's the PMOI, and also known as the Mujahideen Khalq, aka also known as MEK, MEK. Um, MEK is a terrorist organization that dates back to the 1960s. So it was sort of a Marxist Islamic group, odd combination. But it was carrying out terrorist attacks in the 60s and 70s against U.S. personnel, U.S. military personnel in Iran, killed several. With the fall of the Ayatollah, it continued its terrorist attacks, terrorist activity. It was on the State Department's list of foreign terrorist organizations. But then when the U.S. invaded Iraq in 2003, they ran up against the MEK, who had been actually hiding out, operating from Iraq under Saddam Hussein, who gave them protection because they were attacking Iranians. Well, lo and behold, guess what? The Central Intelligence Agency, my old outfit, adopts them. And the MEK all of a sudden now goes from being terrorists we got to control and stop to they're our buddies, they're our collaborators. And the CIA, along with Israeli Mossad, over the years has used the MEK to carry out assassinations in Iran, as well as to organize protests and stir dissent. So what got launched last Monday in tandem with the meeting of Netanyahu and Trump was this, I'll call it information operation, this covert action, where the essence of a covert action is you can take a legitimate issue. There is legitimate anger and opposition to current government policies in Iran because of the inflation. But that doesn't mean that the majority of Iranians are blaming that on the Islamic Republic, the government, the Ayatollah Khamenei. There is some blame being cast at Pezeshkian. But what was done is this organized through MEK, stirred up protests and created a narrative for the foreign media. Now, I tried to get a sense of what was going on, and fortunately I was able to talk to Nima Al-Rashid. Nima runs a podcast. I talk to him twice a week, this broadcast, and he was actually in Iran visiting his homeland for the first time in 12 years, as well as talk to Professor Morandi. And what the Iranian people who lived there were saying was nothing at all like what the West was being told. And I fully believe that this narrative about Iran on the point of collapse and then, as you said, with Pompeo's and Mossad walking alongside them, yeah, no shit. That's exactly what's going on. Thank you for confirming it, Pompeo, you pompous doofus. Good God. That's where I think the invasion or the kidnapping of Maduro fits in. The U.S. needs to get control of the Venezuelan oil so that in the event or when Israel launches its next attack on Iran, and Iran in turn shuts down the flow of oil out of the Persian Gulf, that there is an alternative source of oil available on the market that will prevent the price from spiking to levels.
I think we lost Larry. No, I think we lost you there for a bit, Larry.
Oh, what did you last hear?
You said about the prices, about from preventing the prices of oil from spiking.
Yeah, prevent it from spiking because if it does spike, that would really damage the U.S. economy and it would destroy the narrative that things have gotten better under Trump. So Trump wants to be able to preserve that. But anyway, I don't think that this attack on Venezuela and the capture of Maduro is independent of what the United
Mhm.
States is trying to do with Israel with respect to Iran.
That plays very well with a interview I had a few interviews back with Dr. Trita Parsi. Made the exact same predictions that we're gearing up for one, basically. Um, Larry, on a personal note, because a lot of people that are going to be watching this in Poland are going to be saying, "Oh, here's a CIA officer who's a former CIA officer, analyst, who's saying some sensible things." And I know you've been in Russia, in Mother Russia, recently, and to a lot of our Polish audience, that might be a shock. Oh my God, he used to work for the CIA, now he's traveling to Russia. Something ain't right here.
Yeah.
But how would you explain to an open-minded Pole who wants to find out more about Russia from a guy who used to work for the CIA, what life really is in Russia, and what were your impressions of visiting the Russian Federation? I know you've been there a couple of times, but I've noticed that the recent one was pretty kick-ass, so to say, especially those
Oh yeah.
cigars with Steven Seagal and Scott Ritter.
Yeah.
So just give us some of your impressions on your travels in the former Soviet Union.
Well, you're a hockey fan, right? So
Have to be, have to be.
is the name Vyacheslav Fetisov familiar to you?
Indeed, indeed.
Yeah. So I got to spend 45, 50 minutes with him. What a gentleman. And, those not familiar with hockey who may know like basketball, I liken him to, I call him the Michael Jordan of hockey. Uh, he is he is on that level. Um, and, it really got some great insights from him. Um, the stereotype that we're taught is that Russia is this authoritarian society. There's no freedom of expression. People are constantly looking over their shoulders because they're being monitored always by the secret police. Well, that's what the West has become. When you get people being arrested in England, in London specifically, for standing outside an abortion clinic, silently praying, and they get arrested for just having thoughts inside there. They're not even saying anything, but they are, quote, alleged to have these thoughts in their head that the government doesn't support. And so they are arrested and acquire a criminal record in the so called uh, bastion of liberty, which was the UK. In contrast, here I am in Russia. Uh, there, I was never under surveillance to my knowledge, and I have had training in detecting counter surveillance. Uh, you hardly see any police on the street. The streets are very clean, very safe. Um, but the Fetisov, he provided some insights because he says, when he
Hmm.
first, uh, he played for the Soviet Army team. He was in the 1980 team that lost to the U.S. at Lake Placid in New York.
Yeah.
Um, but he continued to play for the next 9 years and then sought permission as perestroika was underway and the National Hockey League was hot as they could be to try to get some Russian players into the league. And so Fetisov received an offer from the New Jersey Devils, I believe, and
Hmm.
finally got permission from what was left of the Soviet Union to leave the Soviet Union and go to play in New Jersey. And he said when he got to the United States, he said what bothered him with the style of play in the National Hockey League at that time was that it was all built around the individual. Now,
Hmm.
Fetisov wasn't talking about a collective mentality where you can't have your own personality, your own thoughts. But what he was raised in was this mentality of if we're going to accomplish something, we need to work together as a team. We can't be just a bunch of individuals pursuing our own agendas. And that was one of the things that he brought to the National Hockey League. And he lasted, I think, 2 years with the New Jersey Devils, was picked up by the Detroit Red Wings. And there they won 2 back-to-back Stanley Cups with that mentality. So finding that in Russia, they're not communist, but there still is this legacy of how do we work together for the benefit of the community? This it's not about how do I as an individual take from everybody else and make myself successful. It was how do we work together as a group? How do we benefit others? I got to speak with a broad sector of people in Russia. It was the trip was sponsored by the International Unity Club, and what's fascinating about the International Unity Club is it's not just one, it's not an ideological organization designed to quote support the party of Putin, as an example. I met with 5 of the senior members of the Communist Party. The actual Communist Party is still active in Russia. They got about 10% support when it comes to vote and representation in the Duma. I met with their leader, Gennady Zyuganov. He is a character. He shows up. He's got I got a chocolate bar from him. There's a chocolate bar with his picture on the wrapper. So he's quite the for being a communist, he's quite the capitalist marketer. But none of these people were crazy. They have differences of opinion, but at the same time, he was still all about Mother Russia, Russia as a nation. But the other thing that I found I came away with saying that this is Russia exists to teach the world that there's hope for the future. Because when you go back and you look at what happened to Russia with the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the breakup of the former Soviet republics, including Ukraine, went their own way. The economy was savaged. The people lost jobs. You couldn't find work. The life expectancy of Russian men fell from like 63 years of age to 56. Suicides were rampant. There was hunger. The size of the middle class shrank to about 7%. There was a tremendous income inequality. Russia, to a friend of mine who worked for a law firm and started there in 1999, he described it, and I'm quoting him. He says, Moscow was a shithole. It was awful, dirty, unclean, unsafe. But now, and since then, here we are 27 years later, Moscow is a gleaming jewel, as is St. Petersburg, as is other cities throughout Russia, Kazan and Grozny. The other lesson, so what Russia showed is that you can come out of this tremendous economic turmoil and you can regrow your economy in a way that it benefits everybody in society, not just the very wealthy. Putin has built up the middle class, but the other thing that's taken place is Russia has shown how to deal with religious diversity. While Russia is a declared, avowed Orthodox Christian country, it's filled with at least 140 different ethnic groups, and you have Catholics, you have evangelicals on the Christian side, you have Muslims, both Sunni and Shia, you have Buddhists, Hindus, and so it covers the range. And yet, Russia has figured out how to navigate these sectarian issues in a way that those various sectarian groups are still nationalists. They think of themselves as Russians
Mm-hmm.
and believe in protecting and preserving Russia. When you look at Russia fought a 10-year, 11-year war in Chechnya against radical Islamists that were bought and paid for by Western intelligence for the express purpose of trying to destroy Russia. And it was a brutal war. Not quite as brutal in terms of loss of life as what is going on in Ukraine right now, but it was still pretty horrific. And yet, out of that, you now have Muslim commanders, generals in the Russian army that are fighting as Russian nationalists. I spent some time with Lieutenant General Abdialudinov. He's a hero of Russia, just a tremendous guy and a devout Muslim, but he is a Russian patriot. And you're thinking, this is like here in the United States, there's the propaganda campaign towards so directed at anti-Islamic and trying to spike tensions between the so-called Judeo-Christians and Islam. You don't see that in Russia. So, it's that combination of things that I began to get an appreciation that the Russians really do see the world in a different way. Now, with respect to Poland, I don't understand what's going on there. And I'd look to you for the answer because, they're pissed at Russia for the old Soviet Union for the Katyn Forest massacre. Okay. Yes. The Soviets were involved with this murder of the very elite in Polish society. But I think the total numbers on that were, 20,000, maybe 40,000 max, which I'm not trying to say that's inconsequential. But then you turn to what Bandera did in the Volyn massacre to Polish civilians across the board. And those numbers I think, were up in excess of 140,000. So just by body count alone, you would think that there'd be more anger at the Banderites than there are at the Soviets, which no longer exist. And yet it appears to be the opposite. You tell me.
Well, Larry, you're the guest, so I wouldn't want to take the focus off you. But I think, generally speaking, maybe if we can see each other on your Countercurrents channel, I'll tell you more.
Yeah, no, actually, I was, but before we leave today, I was going to suggest I want to do something with you in January on Countercurrents, where you can explain the Polish position to anybody that takes time to watch my channel.
I would love to. It would be an honor. But generally speaking, I don't think this is a surprise to the readers of Dorzecza and to the viewers of our channel. Poland, unfortunately, there's a statement by Professor Bronisław Ogowski. He's a philosopher from Krakow, very aged man right now, but he's one of the few sane voices on Polish-Russian relations. And he wrote in one of his books, actually, I'm going to find the quote especially for you because this was in a response that I wrote to the U.S. ambassador here in Poland recently. And I think it was pretty epic because I actually used that quote. Just give me a sec here. To sort of to tell you about the essence of, the anti-Russian stance of the so-called Third Republic after 1989. It was a quote from his book. Just let me pull it up here. Because the current American ambassador was praising the prime minister of Poland, and I just went to his comment section and wrote back to him. Just give me a second here. Where do we have that? Getting there. Okay, so here's the quote from Professor Bronisław Ogowski, the academic that I mentioned earlier, which basically places sort of in a time capsule why the Polish Republic, the Third Polish Republic, acts as it does vis-a-vis Russia with American help. So here's the quote. When Napoleon arrived in Warsaw, his minister, Talleyrand, instructed him on how to address the Poles so as to please them and win them over. First, denounce Russia and recall Jan Sobieski's victory at Vienna. It worked exactly as intended. Poles are made of plasticine, not all Poles, obviously. And with flattery, one can mold them into whatever one wants if one is an American, and
Could you
especially if one is an American. Yeah, in
could
Washington,
you
they know
start,
this well. Yeah.
Mike? Could you start again because you froze right there? I missed you. You got into the first sentence and then it froze.
Oh, okay. Let me just bring the quote up again. So Professor Bronisław Ogowski writes, quote, when Napoleon arrived in Warsaw, his minister Talleyrand instructed him on how to address the Poles so as to please them and win them over. First, denounce Russia and recall Jan Sobieski's victory at Vienna. It worked exactly as intended. Poles are made of plasticine, and with flattery, one can mold them into whatever one wants, if one is an American especially. In Washington, they know this well and push their game of playing on Polish vanity to the point of cynicism, end quote. So I would say that is a perfect, a brief summary of the Polish mentality. We can expand on it in another interview, but I'll say this: there has been a change, at least in Polish society, regarding the war in Ukraine itself, if not Russia. But if one takes that to a logical conclusion, one will also have to start asking questions about Russia, like, is Russia really our enemy? Should we be fighting a proxy war against Russia? Why should we be fighting a proxy war against Russia? Is it in our economic interest? Should we ally with Slovakia and Hungary? Those are the questions that are slowly coming to the fore because Poles are sick and tired of supporting Ukraine, of Ukrainian grain destroying the livelihood of Polish farmers.
Yeah,
And let's not forget the millions of Ukrainians who are in Poland who by no means have made our country safer. And we're actually living through I would say, our first major immigration crisis in here in Poland due to the influx of those Ukrainians. So, in a nutshell, Larry, that's that's the situation right now.
yeah. I mean, watching this, what I see from the outside is a split with you got Donald Tusk on one side and Navrosky on the other, and Navrosky seems to have the popular support.
He definitely does. President Navrotsky, I would say, is learning on the job. He's 42 years old, so only 2 years older than me. Uh, I'm not ruling him out yet. I think if he plays his cards right, and he's done a couple of good things so far
Yeah,
that have definitely, like apparently when he met with Zelensky recently in Warsaw, he actually gave him a book about the Volyn massacre to show him, hey,
yeah,
this is
yeah,
what your
yeah, yeah.
compadres did back in the day. And that apparently sparked a lot of outrage in Ukraine that the Polish president treated Zelensky that way. There is no love between Navrotsky and Zelensky, that's for sure. The Ukrainian lobby right now is basically Tusk and his party. However, Navrotsky has to sort of balance between being seen as even slightly pro-Russian by saying some sensible things and still maintaining, contact with his electoral base that elected him on the issues of stopping support for Ukraine, no more Ukrainian refugees in Poland, and talking about the Volyn massacre and banderism, and actually banning banderism in Poland, which was one of his points in his political program, to ban all banderite symbology, the promotion of banderism in Poland.
Right.
So that is still a work in progress, and I'm hoping it'll work out. Larry, thank you very much. We went a bit over time, my friend. Enjoy the
Oh,
rest of your Sunday down there in sunny and beautiful Florida, and hopefully
yep.
we'll see each other soon. Also on this channel, I know our audience is going to be very happy when we publish this in 2 or 3 days. Keep safe, my friend, and we shall remain in contact.
Thank you, Doc. Good to see you. Thank you, Mike.